For thousands of years, Buddhist and Zen teachers have returned to one simple truth. When we stop fighting the changing nature of life, the heart begins to rest. These teachings have guided generations of people toward a quieter mind, a softer breath, and a little more peace in an uncertain world. Tonight, we will spend time with that ancient wisdom together. We will journey through gentle stories, simple teachings, and quiet reflections that can help the mind loosen its grip and settle into rest. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. The Buddha taught, all conditioned things are impermanent. Everything changes. The seasons change. Our joys change. Our sorrows change. When we remember that everything passes, we do not need to cling so tightly. We do not need to solve everything. We do not need to hold the whole world together by effort alone. Tonight, we will remember that peace is not something far away. It is often what remains when, for a few quiet moments, we stop struggling with what is already here. So let the shoulders soften. Let the breath slow in its own natural way. You do not need to understand every word. You only need to listen and rest. Let's begin our journey together. Long ago, beneath the shade of a fig tree in a warm and dusty country, there sat a man who had walked many roads. He had walked barefoot across many kingdoms. He had sat quietly with kings and with beggars, with mothers carrying their children, and with old men carrying only their grief. He listened to them all, and when at last he spoke very simply. His name was the Buddha, and what he taught was this: everything changes. Everything is always changing. When we see this with a quiet heart, he said, our sorrow begins to soften like frost beneath the morning sun. In the ancient language of the Buddha, this truth had a gentle name. It was called anicca. It means, simply, all things pass. The morning passes into noon. The flower passes into petals on the stone. The young pass into the old. The old pass into the wind. Nothing we hold will stay. And yet, the Buddhist masters taught, this is not a reason for sorrow. It is the beginning of love. For when we truly understand that each moment is passing, we begin, for the first time, to truly see it. Let us explore a story that unfolds in a faraway kingdom, in a time so long ago that even its name has been forgotten by the wind. It is the kind of story that the old grandmothers used to tell, slowly, beside a warm hearth, in winters that lasted a long, long time. There was once a king and a queen who ruled over a peaceful land of rice fields and gentle hills. They had one son, a prince, and they loved him beyond all measure. But as the prince grew into a young man, they began to worry for him. They began to worry for the kingdom he would one day inherit. The prince was clever. He was skilled in the handling of horses, in the bending of the bow, in the strategies of war. But his heart was closed. He cared little for the people of the land. He did not pause to hear the farmer's tale or the old woman's prayer. He rode past the villages without looking. In some strange way, he lived as though the world around him were made of painted scenery, and only he himself were real. One evening, the king turned to the queen as they sat before the low fire in their chamber. His voice was soft and troubled. He said, "What is to become of him? He is to be king one day. But a king without a heart is not a king. He is a lantern without a flame. The queen looked quietly into the fire for a long time. Then she said, "There is an old one who lives beyond the eastern wood. They say he has walked through many lives. Let us go to him. Perhaps he will know what to do." So in the first blue light of morning, the king and queen set out together. Their horses moved softly along a mossy path, and the mist clung to the ferns, and the forest smelled of wet earth and pine. At last, they came to a small hut where a thin column of smoke rose from the roof. Inside, they found an old sorcerer sitting on a woven mat. He had kind, quiet eyes, like two small pools of still water. He did not seem surprised to see them. He listened to them without interrupting. When they had finished, he poured them tea in small clay cups. He asked, very gently, "Tell me, what does your son love? What stirs his heart, even a little?" The king and queen looked at each other. It was a harder question than they had expected. They thought for a long while. At last the queen said softly, almost in a whisper, "Horses. He has always loved horses." The old sorcerer nodded slowly, and a faint smile touched the corners of his mouth. He said, "Bring him to the palace gardens at dawn, and leave the rest to me." The next morning, the sun had just begun to touch the tops of the cherry trees when the prince stepped into the garden. The air was fresh with the scent of dew and white blossoms. Small birds were moving in the branches. And there, standing quietly between two willow trees, was the most beautiful horse the prince had ever seen. The horse was white, white as the first snow of winter. Its mane flowed like silk in the soft morning air. Its eyes were dark and deep, as though they held a sky of their own. The prince stood very still. In all his life, he had never felt anything like what he felt looking at this horse. The old sorcerer stepped forward with quiet steps. He said, "Do you like him?" "I must have him," the prince said. His voice was almost a whisper. "Name your price." The sorcerer smiled. "First," he said, "you must ride him. Only then will you know if he is truly yours." The prince climbed into the saddle, and the moment his hand touched the soft white mane, the horse lifted its head and gave one long, delighted breath. And then it began to run. Oh, how it ran! The prince felt the wind rush past his face and pull the hair back from his brow. He felt the rhythm of hooves beneath him, like a steady drumbeat growing faster and faster. The palace walls blurred and fell away behind him. The rice fields and the farmhouses rushed past. Goats and geese scattered before the white horse, like leaves before a great wind. And still the horse ran. They crossed the low hills where the shepherds were tending their flocks in the morning light. They passed beside clear streams where herons stood on one leg, perfectly still. They climbed into the foothills where the air turned cooler and smelled of pine needles and wet stone. The prince laughed out loud. It was a laugh he had never heard from his own throat before. It was a laugh that had been asleep in him for many years. The horse galloped higher still into mountain passes where the clouds came down to touch the tops of the trees. The prince did not try to turn back. He did not want to. For the first time in his life, he was wholly alive, wholly in the wind, wholly in the running. And then, at last, as the day grew old, the prince found himself in a deep, ancient forest he had never seen before. The trees grew tall and mossy. The light between them was green and dim, like the light inside a deep lake. The horse slowed to a walk. The prince looked around. He did not know where he was. He rode on through the dim light until he came to a small wooden cabin tucked quietly among the trees. Smoke rose from its chimney in a thin blue ribbon. The prince dismounted, knocked softly on the door, and the door was opened by a young woman. She had long dark hair and eyes as quiet as forest pools. She smiled just a little and said, "You have ridden far, I think. Come in. My father is just finishing his supper. There is always room for one more." Inside, the cabin was warm and simple. An older man, the woodcutter, sat by the fire, his calloused hands resting on a wooden bowl. He looked up, and without asking any questions, he said, "Sit. Eat. The forest is no place to sleep tonight." The prince stayed that night, and in the morning he set out to find his way home. But the paths of that forest twisted and turned in ways he had never known. Every villager he met shook her head when the prince described the kingdom he came from. No one had ever heard of it. As the light began to fade, the prince returned, weary, to the cabin among the trees. "I cannot find the way," he said. The woodcutter only nodded and poured him another bowl of soup. Day after day, the prince searched, and day after day he returned to the small cabin in the woods. The seasons began to turn. The leaves yellowed, then fell. The first snow arrived, covering the pines in silence. And slowly, without quite noticing, the prince began to forget. He began to help the woodcutter. He learned to split logs, to shape bowls from soft wood, to listen to the songs of the wind in the tall branches. His hands grew strong and brown. The palace, the crown, the old life, they all began to feel like a dream he had once had a very long time ago. And the young woman with the quiet eyes. One evening, by the fire, she looked at him, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything for a long time. They were married that spring, beneath the white blossoms of a wild cherry tree. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl. The boy had his father's laugh. The girl had her mother's eyes. The prince, who was no longer a prince in anyone's eyes, became a woodcutter himself, a quiet and beloved man of the forest. His days were filled with simple work, the rising before dawn, the steady rhythm of the axe, the smell of fresh wood and morning bread. His evenings were filled with small hands tugging at his sleeve, asking him to tell a story. His heart, which had once been closed like a locked chest, opened slowly, like a flower that had finally found the sun. In the winters, they would sit together around the fire, all 4 of them, and the wind would move in the tall pines outside, and the world would feel as safe and as close as a small warm hand. In the summers, he would carry his daughter on his shoulders down to the stream, and she would laugh the way his mother had once laughed, long ago, in a place he no longer remembered. He did not know that he had ever been a prince. He did not know that he had ever been anything but this: a husband, a father, a man who loved his family more than his own breath. There was a place in the deep forest that he loved above all others. It was a small glen with a still, clear pond where light fell in long green beams through the high trees. He would walk there alone sometimes, in the early mornings, when the mist still lay upon the water. One day, as he stood at the edge of the pond, he heard his children calling out from among the trees. They came running, their small feet flying over the moss. Behind them, silent as a shadow, there moved a great tiger. His children leapt into the pond, and the tiger leapt in after them, and the waters closed over like a mirror. His wife came running from the trees, calling their names, and she too slipped into the water and was gone. The white horse, the horse he had not thought of in many long years, came galloping from the forest, and it too went into the pond. And in a single breath, all that he loved in this world had vanished. The glen was silent. The pond was still. The man fell to his knees, and he wept the way one weeps only for a loss so great that there are no words for it. And then, very gently, he felt a soft hand upon his shoulder. He looked up, and his mother's eyes were looking down into his. The queen. There was worry upon her face, and behind her, the faces of the court, the gardeners, the cherry trees in their white bloom. He was in the palace garden. The white horse stood quietly nearby, as though it had never moved at all. "My son," the queen said softly, "you touched the horse, and you fell to the ground. You have been lying here only a few moments. We could not wake you." The prince stared at her. His lips moved, but no words came for a long time. At last he whispered, "A few moments. But I have lived a whole life. I had a wife. I had children. I had a trade. I loved them so much. Surely it was not a few moments." The old sorcerer bowed low before the queen. He took the white horse by its quiet mane, and he walked away from the palace, and no one in that kingdom ever saw him again. The prince was never the same. He walked back into the palace slowly, like a man who had come home from a very long journey. And in the days and years that followed, his heart stayed open. He listened now to the old woman with her prayer. He sat with the farmers at the edge of their fields. He heard the children when they laughed, and he smiled at the sound. When his father and mother at last passed from this world, he took the crown into his quiet hands, and he ruled the kingdom with wisdom and with kindness for all his days. For he had learned, in those few short moments that were also a lifetime, the oldest teaching there is. Everything he loved would pass. And because of that, everything he loved was precious. The Buddha once said, "The trouble is, you think you have time." It is a simple sentence, and yet it holds the whole of the teaching. We live each day as though the morning will come again 1,000 times. We live as though the faces at our table will always be there, as though the small hands that tug our sleeves will tug them forever. And so, we do not quite see them. We look past them, on our way to something else. The gift of remembering that everything passes is not sadness. It is the quiet waking up of the heart. It is the soft realization that this cup of tea, this breath, this voice of someone we love, is already something we will one day miss. And so, instead of waiting, we lean a little closer. We listen a little more gently. We live the life that is actually here. There is an old Zen saying, "A master held up a flower before his students and said nothing at all. One student smiled, and in that smile, it is said, the master knew that he had understood. What the student understood cannot really be spoken. It is only this. The flower is here. The flower will not be here. And in the little space between those two truths is everything." If you would like, as you rest in the quiet of this moment, you might simply bring to mind one small thing from your day. not a great event, just something ordinary. A face you passed on the street, a window, a sound, the warmth of a cup in your hand. And for just a moment, let yourself feel how that small thing was only here once in exactly that way. It will never quite come again, and yet it was yours. It was given. You do not need to do anything with this feeling. You do not need to hold it, or change it, or make it something bigger than it is. You only need to notice, softly, that you were there, and it was there. And that is the whole miracle. Take a soft breath here. Let the story settle quietly within you. When you are ready, we will continue. There is an old saying that comes down to us from the Zen masters who once lived in the high mountain temples. If you wish to know the truth of this world, they said, go and sit beside a river. Just sit. Do not bring a book. Do not bring a question. Just watch the water for a long, long time. At first, you will see only water. Then, if you sit longer still, you will begin to notice small things. A single yellow leaf turning slowly as it passes beneath a low branch. Light dancing upon a shallow stone. The soft hush of the current moving around a bend. And if you sit longer than that, something even gentler begins to happen. You notice that the river you are watching now is not the river you were watching a moment ago. The leaves that drifted by have floated past. The sunlight has shifted on its surface. Even the stones beneath seem to shimmer in a new pattern. And yet, somehow, it is still the same river. It is the same, and it is not the same. And this, the old masters said, is the first secret of a peaceful heart. All things are moving, always. This is what the Buddha quietly taught beneath his fig tree, and what teachers have passed on from hand to hand for 1,000 generations. Nothing stays. Nothing stands still. Even the stars above us are slowly turning. Even the mountains, which look so solid, are slowly, slowly wearing down under the wind and the rain. And yet so much of the difficulty of a human life comes from trying to hold the river still. We grasp at the water in a closed fist, and we wonder why our hand comes up empty and tired. We long for the seasons to stop where we like them. We wish our children would stay small. We wish our loved ones would never grow old. We wish the good moments would never end, and we wish the hard moments would end right now. And so, without meaning to, we spend much of our lives in a quiet argument with the way things are. Let us explore a story about an old king who ruled many lands in the ancient time before the maps were written. He was a mighty man, a warrior, respected by all who met him. But as the years began to gather upon his shoulders, he grew troubled. He could not sleep. Something was weighing upon him, and he could not say what it was. One evening, he walked alone through the garden of his palace. The moon was rising over the cedar trees, and the white night flowers had just begun to open. There, beside a still pool, he found a wandering holy man who had come to rest beneath the branches. The king sat down quietly beside him on the smooth stones. For a long while, neither of them spoke. At last the king said, "Old father, you have walked through many lands. You have seen many things. Tell me, what is the most astonishing thing you have ever seen upon this earth?" The holy man looked at him with a soft, kind face. He thought for a moment, and then he said, "The most astonishing thing I have ever seen, great king is this. Every day, people watch the world around them turn. They see children grow into elders. They see the seasons come and go. They see the flowers of spring become the leaves of autumn, and the leaves of autumn become the quiet of winter. And yet, in the deepest corner of their hearts, each one lives as though the river will somehow never touch them. Each one believes, in secret, that for them alone, things will stay as they are. The king was silent for a long time. He looked up at the moon rising above the cedars. He watched a single leaf drift down from a high branch, turning softly as it fell, and settle upon the water of the pool. And at last, he understood what had been keeping him awake. He had been running from this very truth his whole life. He had built tall walls around his cities. He had won great battles on distant plains. He had filled his halls with gold and silks and silver cups. All of it, quietly, in the small hope that he alone would stand outside the moving river. But here, in the gentle moonlight, with this kind stranger beside him, he could no longer keep the old fight alive. He was tired. His hair had turned white in recent years. His knees ached when he climbed the palace steps. And yet, beneath all of the aching and the worry, there was something else now. There was a quiet relief, the relief of letting the pretending fall away. He bowed his head and he thanked the holy man. And from that night onward, the king walked more gently upon the earth. He looked longer into the faces of the people he loved. He listened to the wind in the trees. He paused sometimes, just to watch a child at play in the palace courtyard, or a stonemason at his work, or an old servant feeding the palace koi. He did not become sorrowful. He became kind. It is a simple story, and yet it touches something deep in us, because most of us live as that king once lived. We know in some distant corner of our minds that everything passes. We have read it in books. We have nodded at it quietly when an old friend grew thin and grey. And yet, in the very next breath, we live as though it will never come any nearer. Here is something tender about being human. Knowing a truth and living a truth are two very different things. You may know that water is wet, but you do not truly know it until you step into the cool lake. You may know that bread is warm, but you do not truly know it until you hold a fresh loaf, just out of the oven, in your own two hands. In the same quiet way, we may know that everything passes, but until we feel it softly in our own lives, it stays only a thought, only a word. An old Zen teacher once said, "Do not confuse the finger pointing at the moon with the moon itself. Ideas are fingers. They point. They are useful. But the moon itself, round and silver and full, is something we can only know by looking up and letting its light fall upon our own face." There is another gentle story from the Buddhist traditions. Let us explore a story about a gardener who lived at the edge of a quiet village. She loved her garden more than anything in the world. She tended it with great care. She knew the name of every flower and the best hour to water each one, and which roses bloomed in early summer and which waited for the late days of autumn. In spring, her garden was famous in the village. People walked slowly past her low stone wall just to see the peonies opening, to breathe in the scent of the wisteria, to watch the small butterflies resting upon her lavender. But she had one sorrow. She could not bear to watch the flowers fade. When a rose began to droop, she would hurry out in the morning to cut it down before the petals fell. When a peony grew weary, she would turn her eyes away. She loved the blooming, but she could not love the fading. And little by little, this made her tired. She began to spend less time in her garden because every flower she loved only reminded her of a flower she would one day lose. She would stand at her kitchen window, looking out at the beds she had once tended with such joy, and she would feel a small, unspoken weight settle upon her shoulders. One soft afternoon, an old pilgrim came walking down the road. He was thin and dusty from long travel, with a wooden staff and kind eyes. He asked if he might rest a while in her garden, and she welcomed him in. She offered him tea and a small plate of rice cakes. He sat very still among the roses for a long time, his eyes half closed, his hands folded in his lap. He did not seem to be looking at anything in particular. He seemed, rather, to be letting the garden look at him. When at last he stood to leave, she asked him shyly, "Old friend, what do you see when you sit so quietly among the flowers?" He smiled. He said, "I see the same thing you see. I see flowers. Some are opening. Some are falling. Some are already soft earth beneath my feet. But perhaps we see it a little differently. For I have come to know that a falling petal is not less beautiful than an open bloom. It is only beautiful in a different way. And the earth where last year's roses now sleep is also beautiful. It is all one garden. It is all one quiet, loving thing." The gardener did not say anything for a long while. She walked with him to the gate, and she watched him continue on down the dusty road until he disappeared around the bend. But the next morning, she went back out among her flowers, and when she found a rose beginning to droop, she did not hurry to cut it away. She sat beside it on the cool earth. She looked at it with soft eyes. She watched, for the first time, how a single petal came loose, hung for a moment in the still air, and then drifted down onto the soil. And she found, to her own quiet surprise, that she loved it no less for its falling. In some gentle way, she loved it even a little more. This is what the Zen masters mean when they speak of opening to the way things are. We stop trying to trim away the fading parts of life. We stop fighting the river. We begin to see that the whole garden, the blooming and the falling and the quiet sleep of the earth is one gentle thing, one living, moving, tender thing. The Buddha himself spoke of this with his own soft words. "All conditioned things are impermanent," he said. "Work out your own peace with diligence." He did not say this to frighten anyone. He said it the way an old grandfather might say to a child, reminding her that the sun will set and the sun will rise, and it has always been so, and she is safe within it. When we let the river move, something in us settles. We no longer have to run so hard. We no longer have to protect so much. We begin, quietly, to rest. There is a gentle image from the old Buddhist monasteries that captures this feeling well. The monks would sometimes sit in silence beside a small brook at the back of their temple. They were not trying to understand the brook. They were not trying to teach it anything. They were simply keeping it company. And the Dharma teachers would say that this was the whole of the practice. To keep company with the moving. To let the moving keep company with us. To sit beside the passing world, the passing breath, the passing day, and to feel, at last, that we are not separate from it. We never have been. This is why, at the end of long lives, so many wise ones have said the same thing, in so many different languages. They have said that it is not our grasping that makes us feel alive. It is our willingness to be soft, It is our willingness to let the river move through us and to be changed and to be made kinder by the passing. If you would like, for just a small moment, you might feel your own breath, not to change it, not to deepen it, only to notice that it is moving. The breath comes, the breath goes. It has been doing this all your life, without you needing to remember to make it happen. And this small, faithful river is a quiet teacher. It whispers over and over, in and out, that you are already part of the flowing. You already know how to let things pass. You have been doing it, breath by breath, since the moment you first arrived in this world. Let us pause for a moment. Notice how you are feeling, and when you are ready, we will continue together. Have you ever walked into a familiar room, stood still for a moment, and then walked out again, unable to remember a single thing you saw? Most of us have. Most of us do it many times in a single day. Our feet go in one direction, our thoughts wander in another, and the ordinary miracle of the moment slips past us, quiet and ungathered. The Zen masters were very interested in this small mystery. They looked closely at the human heart, and they noticed something tender. They noticed that most of the time we are not quite here. We live much of our lives a few steps away from where we are standing. We are thinking of what will happen next, or what has already happened, or what ought to be happening instead. And in all of that, the soft, living world right in front of us goes on without our company. Tonight, we will look gently at the 3 quiet doorways through which we tend to slip away. Not to scold ourselves. The Buddhist teachers were never harsh about this. They spoke of it with a small smile, the way an old grandmother might speak of a child who has wandered off into the garden. "Ah," she might say, "there she goes again. Well, she will come back when the soup is ready." The first doorway is the doorway of wanting. It is the oldest of the 3 and the most familiar. It opens whenever we feel a flicker of pleasure and, almost before we notice, reach for more. Another bite, another glance, another small prize. It is not a bad thing in itself. Wanting is simply part of being alive. But when wanting begins to run us, when it pulls us forward so constantly that we are never fully in the room where we are standing, something quiet in us grows very tired. Let us explore an old story from the forests of a faraway land, a story that has been told for many centuries to teach this truth with a gentle smile. There was once a clever young man who lived in a small village at the edge of a great forest. He wanted very much to catch a monkey, for he had heard that monkeys made delightful companions. He asked the elders of his village how it might be done. The eldest among them, a gentle old woman with a knowing face, smiled and told him this. "Take a small clay pot," she said. "Make the opening just wide enough for a monkey's open hand to slip through. Place a ripe, sweet fruit inside. Tie the pot to the foot of a tree. Then go and sit a little distance away and wait." The young man did exactly as she told him. He chose a soft, fragrant mango, and he placed it in the little clay pot. He tied the pot to the roots of a great tree. Then he sat down beneath the shade of another tree, and he waited. After a while, a small brown monkey came down from the high branches. It moved slowly, softly, with the particular careful quiet of a creature that knows it is being watched by the forest. It sniffed at the pot, It peered inside, its small head tilting this way and that. Then, with great curiosity, it slipped its slender hand through the narrow opening and closed its fist tightly around the fruit. And in that moment, the monkey was caught. For a closed fist holding a mango was far too large to slip back out through the narrow opening of the pot. The monkey pulled. The monkey tugged. The monkey chattered with frustration and made small angry faces at the pot, as though the pot itself had played some terrible trick. But the monkey would not, could not, let go of the fruit. Time passed. The shadows in the forest grew longer. The young man sat beneath his tree, watching quietly. Now and then, the monkey would seem to pause, and the young man would hold his breath, thinking that surely, this time, the little creature would simply let go. But each time, the fist closed tighter. Each time, the monkey pulled harder. The thought of releasing the sweet fruit, even for a moment, seemed impossible to him. When the villagers came walking down the path, they found the little monkey still there, still gripping the fruit, even as they drew near. The old woman who had given the advice was with them, and she looked at the monkey with great kindness. She turned to the young man. "Do you see?" she said gently. "The monkey is not trapped by the pot. The monkey is trapped only by what it will not release." The young man looked at the monkey for a long moment, and somewhere inside him, something quiet opened, for he recognized himself. He recognized how often his own small fists had closed around things he was unwilling to let go. The second doorway is the doorway of shoulds. This is what happens when we look at our life and feel, somewhere deep in our chest, that things ought to be different than they are. We should be further along in life. Our partner should be more understanding. The neighbors should be quieter. The weather should be kinder. This pain in our back should have gone away by now. The word should is a small, innocent word, but it is also a soft door through which we quietly leave the room. Let us explore a story from a cold mountain country about a woman who lived with a long sorrow. Many years before, a great drought had come. Her family's fields had failed. The river that had run past their old home had grown thin and then gone silent. She had been forced to leave her beloved place in the hills and move down into the lowlands, where the air was heavier and the stars seemed farther away. She never quite forgave the sky for its unkindness. She never quite forgave the earth. She spent her days muttering softly to herself that things should not be as they were. The drought should never have come. The home should never have been lost. Her life should never have turned this way. Her neighbors in the valley were gentle with her. They brought her baskets of persimmons in the autumn and small gifts of salt in the winter. But she could not quite receive their kindness. She was too busy, in the quiet of her own heart, arguing with what had already happened. She was too busy living inside the life she had wanted, rather than the life she had. She lived with this heaviness for many years. Then, one autumn, a wandering monk stopped at her cottage door, asking only for a cup of tea. She invited him in, for that was still the custom in her country, though her voice was weary. She poured for him. As he drank, he looked at her with quiet eyes. He said, "You carry something heavy, old mother." She told him of her long sorrow. She told him of all the things that should not have happened. He listened without interrupting. And when at last she was finished, he said something she would remember for the rest of her days. "Old mother," he said softly, "for all these years, you have been trying to live in a life that did not happen. You have been pouring your tea into a cup that is not there. This is why your hands grow so tired." The old woman wept then, for a long time. She did not weep because he had scolded her. He had not scolded her. She wept because, for the first time in many years, she felt the small, tender relief of being allowed to simply live in the life she actually had. When her tears were finished, she looked around her small cottage. She looked at the kettle, at the soft evening light on the wooden floor, at the monk's calm face across the table, and she thought quietly, "This is my life. This, right here. And it is enough. It has been enough all along." The third doorway is the doorway of slipping away. This is the quietest of the three, and perhaps the hardest to notice in ourselves. It is not grasping, and it is not pushing against. It is a kind of soft departure. We lose ourselves in our thoughts. We busy ourselves. We fill every empty moment with something, anything, so that we do not have to feel what is actually here. We look away, gently, again and again. There is an old saying among the wandering monks of India. When a thief meets a saint on the road, they say, "The thief sees only the saint's pockets." It is a small saying, and yet it carries so much within it. The thief is not evil. The thief is simply so focused on one narrow thing, so accustomed to looking for that one narrow thing, that the whole of the saint walking past, the presence, the peace, the light in the eyes, is all invisible to him. He sees only pockets, because that is what he has trained himself to see. Most of us are a little like that thief, though rarely with pockets. We walk through a beautiful evening and see only our to-do list. We sit with someone we love and hear only the rehearsal of our next sentence. We move through a whole day and arrive at night wondering where the day went. The day did not go anywhere. We were the ones who slipped away. Let us explore one more small story. There was once an old scholar who lived alone at the top of a stone tower in an ancient city. He had read every book in the great library. He knew the names of all the stars and the rivers of distant continents and the dates of every long-forgotten battle. His study was cluttered with scrolls and maps and small glass bottles of ink. The dust had gathered quietly in the corners for many years. But he had not truly sat with another human being in nearly 30 years. He had nieces and nephews down in the city, and old friends who still sometimes sent him letters, but he answered them briefly and returned to his books. He had come to believe, somewhere along the way, that thinking was the same as living. One evening, a young niece of his climbed the long, winding staircase to his study. She had just turned 12 years old. She found him bent over a thick, dusty volume, his eyes squinting at the faded ink by the light of a single oil lamp. She did not speak at first. She simply sat beside him for a while, her small legs swinging from the old wooden stool. Then, very softly, she said, "Uncle, look out the window." He looked up, for the first time in many months. The sun was setting over the rooftops of the old city. The light was soft and gold, and it was pouring itself across the terracotta tiles. A few bells were ringing from a distant temple, slow and sweet. Swallows were turning in the evening air, their small shapes dipping and rising against the warm sky. Somewhere far below, a child was laughing. The old scholar stared. He did not say anything for a long, long time. Then, very slowly, he reached for his niece's small hand. "I did not know," he whispered. His voice was thick, as though it had not been used for softness in a long while. I did not know any of this was here. His niece, who was a wise child, did not say anything at all. She only held his hand, and together they watched the sky darken until the first stars appeared above the rooftops of the old city. The three doorways are not our enemies. They are very old habits. They belong to all of us. The teachers of old did not ask their students to be rid of them. They only asked that we see them softly, the way one might notice a familiar dog trotting past on an old road. Oh, there it goes again. Hello, old friend. And each time we notice, something gentle happens. We come back. We are simply here again. The monkey's small hand opens. The old woman looks up from her long sorrow. The scholar turns toward the window and sees that the world has been waiting for him all along. There is no great effort in this coming back. There is no ladder to climb. There is only the soft turning of attention, again and again, toward the small miracle that is always here. The warmth of the mug in your hand, the sound of someone breathing beside you, the taste of a piece of bread, the particular light of a late afternoon. These things do not need to be earned. They do not need to be deserved. They are given freely, over and over, to anyone who is willing to notice. The Buddha once said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The doorways we walk through are often made of hollow words. The word should, the word more, the word later, but the small word that calls us home, here, now, this, is a word that has always been waiting for us. It has never gone anywhere. It is never too late to turn toward it. Let us pause for a moment. Notice how you are feeling. And when you are ready, we will continue together. We spend so much of our lives facing outward. We look ahead to what is coming. We look behind to what has already passed. We look around to see what we might gather in, or step away from, or worry about. Very rarely, in the whole of an ordinary day, do we stop and turn and quietly look the other way. Yet the Zen masters said that it is in that small turning that everything begins. They had a gentle name for it. Some called it coming home. Some called it the quiet return. An old monk in a faraway country was once asked by his students how the great journey of awakening begins. He only smiled. "The journey begins," he said, "when you stop going anywhere. When you set down your bag. When you turn, slowly, and face the heart that has been walking beside you all along, waiting patiently to be seen." Most of the weight we carry in life, it is said, is not the weight of what has happened to us. It is the weight of what we have not yet turned toward. There is a small question that the Buddhist teachers sometimes placed into the hands of their students, a smooth pebble pressed gently into the palm. The question was this: what am I running from? It is not a harsh question. It is not meant to accuse. The teachers spoke it softly, as a mother might ask a child who has burst into tears for reasons the child cannot yet name. "What is it, little one? What is here? What are we running from?" When we are chasing after something, we are running from something. When we are angry at someone, we are running from something. When we are lost in our phones, busy in our thoughts, speeding from one task to the next with hardly a breath between them, we are running from something. And the something is almost always the same thing. It is some small, tender place inside us that we have not yet let ourselves feel. The Dharma teachers called this tender place the soft spot. It is not a wound. It is more like an open hand. It is the part of us that has been waiting quietly all these years for our company. And it turns out that when we finally turn toward it, it does not swallow us as we had feared. It gives us a kind of peace we did not know was possible. A wise woman of the mountain traditions once said to her students, "Do not be afraid of your own tender places. They are not the enemy. They are the entrance." She meant that what we most wish to avoid within ourselves is very often the doorway through which we finally find our way home. The fear we keep pushing away, the sadness we keep distracting ourselves from, the longing we do not want to admit. These are not obstacles to a peaceful heart. They are the very things a peaceful heart has learned to hold. Let us explore a story about a kind teacher who lived in a small cottage at the edge of the sea. He had taught many students over many long years. He was known across the coast for his warmth and his gentle humor. His students would come to him in all seasons, climbing the small stone path that led up from the fishing village below, and they would leave a little lighter than they had come. But then, in his later years, he came to know that his body was growing tired, and that his time upon this earth was drawing softly to a close. The local healer had told him so with great gentleness, and he had accepted it without a great deal of fuss, as he had accepted most things in his long life. At first, he was very busy. He had many small affairs to put in order. He made plans. He arranged meetings. He worried about his family, about his students, about what would become of the little community he had built over the years. He moved quickly, almost briskly, as though he could outpace what was coming if only he kept himself busy enough. Then one morning he sat down to write letters to his oldest friends. He dipped his brush into the ink, and something in him grew very still. He put the brush down again. He looked out the window at the soft blue light of morning on the sea. He watched a small fishing boat moving slowly across the bright water. He heard the slow clock on his wall tick and tick and tick. And he asked himself, for the first time in many weeks, the simplest of questions. What am I running from? He sat with this question for a long time. The morning light grew slowly warmer across his small wooden table. A single gull called from somewhere far out over the water. And he began to see, with great tenderness, that he had been running from his own fear. He had been running from his own grief. He had been running from the sweet, aching tenderness of loving this life and knowing that he would one day be letting it go. He had been so busy with his plans that he had not allowed himself to simply feel any of it. So he sat with it. He did not push it away. He let the fear be there. He let the grief be there. He let the love be there, the enormous, unreasonable love of every small thing. The love of the morning light. The love of his worn wooden chair. The love of the students who had trusted him with their questions. The love of every shared meal, every long conversation beside the sea, every small bow of goodbye at the gate. He sat and wept softly for a long time. The sea moved quietly outside his window. It did not rush him. Then, very slowly, he picked up his brush again, and he wrote to his friends. He wrote, "Dear ones, I have been given a small question that I would like to pass on to you. The question is this: what are you running from? For every one of us is running from something, some fear we do not wish to feel. Some grief we do not wish to admit. Some tenderness we are too busy to sit with. I have found, only just now, that when the running stops, what is there turns out to be the very door that was always inviting me home. Do not wait for difficult times to turn toward yourself. Turn now. The soft spot is your own heart, and it has been waiting for you all along. He folded the letter carefully. He wrote it out again, many times, for many friends. And when he finally put his brush down at the end of that long morning, he noticed the light on the sea. He noticed the small sound of the kettle on the stove. He noticed the warmth in his own hands. Everything was very alive. Everything was very dear. And he was no longer running from any of it. This is what the teachers meant when they spoke of the turning. We are facing outward. We are caught in the story of what should be different. And then, quietly, we turn. We ask ourselves, what is it, just underneath all of this, that I have not been willing to feel? It is always gentler than we had feared. That is the strange and lovely secret of it. The fear of feeling something is almost always greater than the feeling itself. When we finally let the feeling rise up, it moves through us as a passing weather. It softens. It becomes tender. And we find that we are still here, still breathing, perhaps even more at home in ourselves than we were before. An old Zen saying puts it this way: what you are looking for is what is looking. The warm, kind presence we wish someone would offer us is already inside us, waiting to be offered. The moment we turn toward our own heart, it is given. Let us explore another story from a quieter kind of life. There was once a woman who had raised 3 children with great love. They had filled her home with laughter and tumbled shoes and the smell of simple meals on the stove. She had loved every season of their growing. The early mornings of school lunches packed into small cloth bundles. The long summer evenings of games in the yard. The winter nights around the fire, reading stories aloud until small heads grew heavy against her shoulder. But now, in the span of a single year, all 3 were leaving home. The eldest had taken a post in another country. The middle one was moving to the city to study. The youngest, her youngest, was following a dear friend across the sea. She did not quite know how to feel. She was proud of them. Of course she was. She had raised them well, and they were going out into the world just as she had hoped they would. But when she walked through the empty rooms of her house in the evenings, she felt something heavy and strange inside her chest. She grew irritable. She found herself short with her husband over small things. When the bread was burned one morning, she nearly wept. When a small vase was knocked from a shelf, she snapped in a way that surprised even herself. She kept saying, in the quiet of her own mind, "This should not be so hard. My children are alive and well. I should be grateful. I should not feel this way." One afternoon, she went to sit with an old friend, a woman she had known since girlhood, who had a rare gift for listening without adding many words. The old friend poured her a cup of tea. She listened. She waited. And at last, after a long silence between them, she asked, very softly, "My dear, what are you running from?" The woman grew very still. She had not expected the question. She looked down into her tea, and she watched a small curl of steam rise from its surface. And something in her let go. "I am running from missing them," she whispered. I am running from the grief of my own quiet house. I am running from the feeling that a whole chapter of my life is ending. I have been so busy being brave about it that I have not let myself feel any of it. The old friend simply reached across the small table and took her hand. She did not try to comfort her. She did not try to fix anything. She only held her hand and waited with her. The woman cried quietly for a long while, and when the tears at last eased, she felt something she had not felt in many months. She felt at home in herself again. The grief had not destroyed her. It had only been waiting for her attention. And once she gave it her attention, it moved through her gently, like soft rain through a summer garden. What was left behind was tender and grateful and very much alive. She walked home that evening. She walked through the empty rooms of her house slowly, without fighting the emptiness. She stopped at the wooden door of her daughter's old room. She opened it softly. She looked at the small bed, neatly made, at the worn stuffed rabbit still sitting on the pillow, at the empty desk by the window, and she smiled, a small and tearful smile. She thought, "This is my life, this chapter too, and I am still here, and I can love what is here, even as I miss what has gone." This is the quiet miracle of the turning. When we stop running, nothing terrible happens to us. In fact, something very kind happens. We meet ourselves, and we find, often to our surprise, that our own heart is a far gentler companion than we had feared. It has been waiting all along, patient as a warm lamp, for us to sit down beside it. Perhaps this is why the Buddhist teachers sometimes called this turning the homecoming. Not because we go anywhere. We do not travel. We do not climb a mountain. We do not cross a sea. We only stop, right where we are, and turn our attention toward the one place we have been avoiding for a long time. Our own tender middle, the quiet center of our own chest, the soft animal of our own feeling. And when we arrive there, quite often, nothing dramatic happens at all. There is no sudden lightning. There is no great revelation. There is only a small, soft breath, a settling, a recognition that feels almost like remembering. Oh, it was you. It has been you all along. I am so glad to see you again. Everything passes in this world. And because everything passes, every moment deserves our tender attention. Even the difficult moments, especially the difficult moments, they are not asking to be fixed. They are asking only to be felt and held and allowed to move through. The Buddha once said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." It is a small, soft sentence, and yet it holds so much inside it. We do not need to earn the turning. We do not need to deserve it. We only have to be willing for one soft breath to stop running and to offer ourselves the very kindness we have been seeking from elsewhere for so long. It is always waiting. It has always been waiting. It is the oldest kind of coming home there is. Rest here a moment. Let whatever is true in you simply be true. When you are ready, we will go on. There is something the Buddhist teachers understood about the human heart, something that took them many quiet lifetimes to learn. They understood that we were never meant to carry everything alone. When we are young, we sometimes believe that being strong means standing on our own 2 feet, needing no one, asking for nothing. It is an admirable kind of belief, but it is also, the teachers said, a very lonely one. And it is not quite the whole truth. Every flower that blooms is held by the soil beneath it. Every river is held by its banks. Every star in the great night sky is held by the vast and silent darkness around it. Not one thing in this world stands alone. Not one. And you are no exception. You are held. You have always been held. This is why, in almost every wisdom tradition upon the earth, the teachers have spoken of the circle, the Sangha of the Buddhists, the gathered friends around a forest fire, the quiet companions who sit together at the edge of the hearth. The old Zen masters said that we could open to almost anything in this life, any great change, any great sorrow, any great passing, if only we did not have to do it entirely by ourselves. Connection, they said, was its own kind of medicine, older than any herb, softer than any prayer. There is a small story about the Buddha himself that teaches this. One morning, a young student came to him with a question. The student said, "Teacher, I have been thinking, surely good spiritual friendship is half of the holy life." The Buddha smiled and shook his head gently. "No, my friend," he said. "Good spiritual friendship is not half of the holy life. Good spiritual friendship is the whole of the holy life." He was not speaking only of monks in robes. He was speaking of all of us. He was speaking of the quiet companionship we give each other when we are afraid. The small hand on a shoulder. The cup of warm tea pressed into a trembling palm. The eye that meets another eye and says, without any words at all, "You are not alone here." Let us explore a story about an old man who lived in a small wooden house at the edge of a village, in a country of tall pines and cold winters. For 50 years, he had been married to a woman he had loved more than the breath in his own chest. They had shared every morning. They had planted their small garden together. They had grown old side by side, with the slow, steady gladness of two trees standing in the same quiet field. And then, one soft summer, she passed gently from this life. She passed in her own bed, in her own home, with his hand in hers. It was as peaceful a passing as anyone might hope for. But even the gentlest farewell can leave a great and quiet space behind it. In the weeks that followed, the old man did not know how to be in the world. He would sit at the kitchen table in the morning, holding his cup of tea, and he would forget for long minutes why he was holding it. He would walk out into the garden and stand still among the tomato plants, not quite remembering what he had meant to do there. The house, which had been full of small sounds for half a century, was now very quiet. He did not cry often. He simply moved slowly, as a man might move underwater. He grew thin. He stopped cooking proper meals. He stopped tending the garden. The small bell above the kitchen door, which had once announced every shared afternoon, hung very still. His neighbors saw. They did not say very much about it. In that part of the world, people did not always use many words. But they began, one by one, to come quietly to his door. An old woman from across the lane began to leave small loaves of fresh bread on his porch in the early mornings, wrapped in a clean cloth. She never rang the bell. She only left the bread and smiled and walked on her way. Sometimes she left a small jar of honey beside the loaf. Sometimes a few pears from her own garden. A young man from 3 houses down began to appear every Saturday, without being asked, to split firewood for him. He would work for an hour or two in the yard, the clean sound of the axe ringing out in the cold air, and then he would stack the wood neatly beside the shed, nod once to the old man through the window, and walk quietly home. He never asked for anything at all. A little girl of about 10 years old, from the family at the end of the lane, began to bring him a single wildflower each day after school. She would knock softly on his door, hand him the flower, and run away giggling before he could say a word. Even the village baker, a gruff old man who had never once spoken to him in 30 years of neighborliness, began to save him a small pastry at the end of each week and leave it wrapped in brown paper on his step. No note, no explanation, just the pastry appearing there each Sunday morning as if by a quiet small magic. The old man did not quite know what to make of any of it at first. He did not feel that he had done anything to deserve such kindness. He had not been a famous man. He had not been a great figure in the village. He had only been a quiet husband, a quiet neighbor, a man who tended his own garden and minded his own small life. But he did not turn the kindness away. He took the bread. He watched the firewood pile grow. He ate the little pastries slowly, in the afternoons, with a cup of tea. He put each wildflower in a small glass jar on the kitchen table, beside a faded photograph of his wife. And slowly, slowly, through the whole of that long autumn, something inside him began to ease. Not to forget, not to stop missing her, but to feel, in the quietest possible way, that he was not carrying the great silence of her absence all by himself. The village was carrying it with him. The bread was carrying it. The firewood was carrying it. The wildflowers were carrying it. The small weekly pastry was carrying it. He was being held without anyone saying a single word about holding him. One winter evening, the little girl brought him a sprig of holly because the wildflowers had all gone to sleep under the snow. He took the holly into his hand. He looked down at her small, bright face. And he said, for the first time in many months, "Thank you, little one. Thank you very much." That was all. But something in him had come quietly home. This is what the old teachers meant when they spoke of the greater field. We imagine, in our hardest hours, that we are very small, and that our sorrow is very large, and that we must face it entirely by ourselves. But the field of love around us is larger than we know. It is made of small things. A loaf of bread on a porch, a pile of firewood, split and stacked, a wildflower in a child's hand. The field is always there, and it is always enough if we are willing to let it in. The Buddhist teachers said that this is why we sit together, why we gather at the fire, why we break bread with strangers and share soup with the hungry. Not because we are especially generous, not because we are saints, but because we remember, softly, that we are part of something larger than ourselves, and that none of us was ever meant to walk the long road alone. Let us explore another small story from a very different corner of the world. There was once a young woman who was traveling alone through a mountain country. She had set out in bright weather, confident in her map and her walking stick. But late in the afternoon, the sky turned grey, and then nearly black. A storm came down suddenly out of the high peaks, cold and sharp. The wind rose. The rain turned to sleet. She could no longer see the path ahead of her. She stumbled forward, her heart pounding, until at last she saw a warm yellow light ahead. It was a small mountain inn, tucked deep among the pines. She pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside, half frozen, rain streaming from her cloak. The inn was small, with a single fire burning low in the hearth. There were 4 or 5 other travelers gathered around it, strangers to her and to each other. An old man with a long white beard sat closest to the flames, warming his hands. A mother with a sleeping child in her lap hummed softly to herself. A young shepherd, wrapped in a thick wool cloak, rested his tired head against the back of his chair. A peddler had set his pack against the wall beside him and sat cross-legged on the floor mending a torn strap. They all looked up as she came in. The innkeeper, without being asked, brought her a bowl of hot soup and a thick slice of bread. She sat down beside the fire. No one spoke for a long while. The storm raged outside, shaking the wooden shutters. But inside, there was a strange and quiet peace. She began to warm slowly. She began to breathe again. She felt her fingers come back to life, one by one. She felt the sting leave her cheeks, and as she sipped her soup, she looked, one by one, into the faces of the strangers around the fire. She saw the lines of their long journeys. She saw the kindness in the old man's tired eyes. She saw the love in the mother's face as she gazed down at her sleeping child. She saw the quiet courage in the young shepherd's weathered hands. She saw the patient labor of the peddler mending his broken strap by firelight. And she saw something wordless pass between them all, a quiet recognition that said, "We are here together in this small warm room, while the storm is outside, and this is enough." She felt, for the first time in her life, that she had never truly been alone. Not in the storms of the high mountains, not in the storms of her own heart. There had always been a fire burning somewhere. There had always been a door somewhere, opening into warmth. There had always been a bowl of warm soup, waiting. She stayed at the inn until the storm passed. And when she walked out again into the cold, bright morning, she was a different person than the one who had walked in the night before. She was not a person who belonged nowhere. She was a person who belonged, in some small but real way, to everyone she met. This is the gift of remembering the greater field. It does not require belief. It does not require faith in any particular thing. It requires only that we let ourselves, for one soft moment, feel that we are part of something warmer and larger than our own small worries. That we have been held all along. That we are held even now. When the great changes come, we do not have to face them alone. We can reach for a hand. We can receive a loaf of bread. We can sit by a fire with strangers. We can let the small kindnesses of this world do their quiet work upon our hearts. We can also, when we are a little stronger, offer our own small kindnesses to others and watch them do their quiet work as well. The field is always passing its warmth along from one set of hands to the next, and it is always large enough for all of us. And often, in doing so, we discover that the tenderness we had been searching for our whole lives has been very close all along. Just outside our door. Just across the kitchen table. Just in the eyes of whoever happens to be sitting beside us now. Settle softly here. Let the warmth of this moment rest in you. When you are ready, we will continue on. If you have ever watched a very young child hold a flower for the first time, you may have noticed something remarkable. The child does not rush. The child does not immediately put the flower down and reach for something else. The child simply holds the flower and looks at it for a long, long time, as if this were the only flower in the world, as if this moment would never come again. Children know something in those early years that most of us slowly forget. They know that each thing is a kind of miracle. The taste of a strawberry, the sound of a bell, the feeling of cool grass beneath bare feet. It is all new. It is all astonishing. And nothing is taken for granted because nothing has yet become familiar. As we grow, we lose this seeing. The strawberry becomes just another strawberry. The bell becomes just another sound. We stop truly looking at the people we see every morning. We stop truly tasting the tea we drink every afternoon. It is not that we want this to happen. It is only that our minds begin to arrange the world into tidy categories, and categories, once made, quietly take the place of actual seeing. The Zen masters noticed this in their quiet monasteries among the pines, and they were softly troubled by it. They saw that we were missing our own lives while we were in the middle of living them, and they began to wonder if there was some quiet way to remember what the child remembered, some gentle way to see each moment, once again, as if it were the only one of its kind. There is a beautiful story about an old forest monk who lived in a simple hut at the edge of a great teak forest, in a hot country where the rains came heavy in summer and the nights were full of insect song. He was beloved by many students, for his teachings were plain and warm, and he had a particular gift for turning the most ordinary moments into small doors of wisdom. He did not lecture. He did not scold. He simply lived his quiet daily life in front of his students, and he let them watch, and somehow, by watching, they learned. One afternoon, a young student came to visit him, bringing a fine glass cup as a gift. The glass had come from a distant city, carried carefully in a basket of straw. It was the most precious thing the young student owned. He presented it with both hands. The old monk received the cup with great pleasure. He held it up to the light. He admired how it caught the sun, scattering small rainbows upon the bamboo walls of his hut. He tapped it gently with his fingernail, and it rang out with a sweet, clear note. "This is a wonderful cup," he said. "I shall love this cup very much." He set it carefully on a low wooden shelf in the corner of the hut, where it caught the late light of afternoon. For many days, he used it for his tea. Each morning, he would lift it from the shelf, hold it up to admire the patterns of light upon its surface, fill it with warm tea, and sit upon his mat, smiling at the small rainbows dancing on his walls. It became, in its small way, one of his morning joys. A few weeks passed. One day, another young student, who had heard the old monk speak often of the passing nature of all things, felt puzzled. He had noticed the monk's pleasure in the cup, and it troubled him. He came to the hut in the cool of the evening, and he sat down at the monk's feet, and he asked, "Teacher, I have heard you speak many times of impermanence. You tell us that nothing lasts, that everything is changing, that we should not cling to any passing thing. And yet, I see you loving this cup. You admire it each morning. You treasure it. Does this not contradict your own teaching? Are you not attached to this cup?" The old monk smiled, the slow, wide smile of someone who has been asked this very question many times before. did not answer right away. He rose and walked slowly to the low shelf and lifted the cup gently from its place. He held it up to the last light of the evening so that a single small rainbow fell across the young student's face. "Do you see this cup?" he said. "I love this cup. It holds my tea admirably. When the sun shines on it, it makes these small rainbows. When I tap it, it sings. Yet for me, this cup is already broken." The young student looked puzzled. "Already broken, teacher? But it is right here. It is whole. I can see it. I can hear it ringing." "Yes," said the old monk gently, sitting down again beside him. "And yet I know what glass is. I know what shelves are. I know what wind is, and stone floors, and old hands that grow less steady with each year. When the wind comes through the open door and knocks the cup from its place, or when my hand shakes one morning and the cup slips from my fingers, I will say, of course, it broke. It was always going to break. I have known this from the first day it came into my life. And because I have known it, every single morning with this cup has been a quiet gift. I have not waited for it to shatter before I began to love it. I have loved it all along because I already knew it was passing." The young student sat very still for a long time, and slowly, as the old monk's words settled within him, something inside him began to open. He looked at his own hands, which were also passing. He looked at the bamboo walls, which were also passing. He looked at the teacher himself, whose hair had already gone white, who was also passing. And for the first time in his young life, he saw them all as precious. Not because he was afraid of losing them, because he knew, at last, that they had always been his to love. He walked home that evening through the cooling forest, and as the first stars appeared above the great teak trees, he held in his mind the image of the small rainbow the cup had cast upon his face. He knew, somehow, that he would not forget it for the rest of his life. This is the teaching of the already broken glass. It is not a sad teaching. It is, in truth, one of the most joyful teachings in the whole of the Buddhist traditions. Because when we know, deep in our bones, that everything passes, we finally stop waiting. We stop postponing our love. We stop saving our gratitude for some better moment that has not yet come. We love now. We thank now. We taste the tea now, because this is the only cup of tea there has ever been, or ever will be, exactly like this one. An old teacher once said, "The trouble is not that things are passing. The trouble is that we were never here to begin with." She meant that it is not impermanence that quietly steals our lives from us. It is our own absence. We are always somewhere else. And in our absence, the beautiful world goes on without our company. Let us explore another small story about a young man who went to study with an old woman, a weaver who lived at the foot of a great mountain. He had come from the city in search of some wisdom he could not quite name. He had read many books. He had listened to many lectures. But something in him still felt hollow, and he had heard, from an old traveler, that this weaver in the mountains knew something that could not be found in books. So he made the long journey. He climbed the dusty path up through the foothills. He arrived at her small wooden workshop, tired and hungry and full of hope. She welcomed him kindly and told him he was free to stay as long as he wished. But she did not give him any teachings. She did not sit him down and explain anything. She did not tell him to meditate, or to chant, or to hold any particular thought in his mind. She only went about her daily life, and he watched. He watched her rise each morning at the first pale light, and fold her sleeping mat very slowly, smoothing each crease with her hand as if she were putting a small child to bed. He watched her sweep the wooden floor of her workshop as if the broom were an old companion she had known for many years. He watched her pour her tea with great care, holding the pot with both hands, her face quiet and attentive, her eyes following the thin curl of steam as it rose from the cup. He watched her cook a simple bowl of rice in the afternoon, stirring it slowly with a wooden spoon. He watched her sit at her loom and pass the shuttle through the threads without the smallest hurry, listening for the small, clean sound of each pass, her body rocking gently in the old rhythm of her trade. After 3 days of watching, the young man could not contain himself. He came to her at her loom one quiet afternoon, and he said, "Old mother, I have come a long way to learn, and I see that you do only ordinary things. You sweep, you fold, you pour, you weave. Yet you do each of them as if it were the most important thing in the whole world. Why do you move with such care?" The old woman did not look up from her loom. She passed the shuttle through. She tapped the thread gently into place. And then she said, very quietly, "Because each of these is the only one of its kind. This sweeping is the only sweeping of this morning. This tea is the only tea. This thread is the only thread. If I hurry past them, who will keep them company?" The young man did not say anything. He sat down beside her loom, and he watched her work, and something inside him grew very still. He stayed with her for many months, and slowly, without her ever giving him a single formal teaching, he began to understand what he had come from the city to learn. When he finally returned home, his friends all said he had changed, though they could not say how. He moved a little more slowly. He looked at his own hands a little longer. He paused, sometimes, in the middle of a cup of tea, as though listening to something they could not hear. The Zen masters said that this kind of seeing is not a great discipline. It is not a mountain we must climb. It is a small, soft noticing, available to anyone, at any moment. It is as close as the cup in your hand right now, as close as the breath being breathed, as close as the single candle of attention that lights up for a heartbeat whenever we remember. A teacher in the Buddhist tradition once asked his students a quiet question. "If you had only 3 days to live," he said, "what would you do differently? Who would you call? What would you say to them? And then, most tender of all, why are you not doing those things now?" He did not ask to frighten them. He asked to invite them, because each of us has only so many days. No one knows the number, and the love we keep saving for later is very often the love that never gets given at all. There is something freeing in remembering this, not in a heavy way, in a light way. It takes the weight off our shoulders, somehow, to know that the ordinary evening we are in right now is not ordinary at all. It is the only one of its kind that has ever been or ever will be. The soft light on the wall, the small sound of a clock somewhere, the warmth of whatever we are holding in our hands. These are not small things. These are the great passing gifts of a single, unrepeatable life. It is a gentle thing to remember, in the quiet of an ordinary evening, that the cup we are holding is already broken. The tea is already drunk. The flower is already falling. And yet, for this breath, it is here. It is whole. It is ours to love. And that is enough. It has always been enough. Let what has been heard settle quietly within. When you are ready, we will continue on. Somewhere in the world right now, a very old woman is sitting by a window. She is watching the light change upon the sill. She is not doing anything else. She is not reading. She is not thinking of what must be done tomorrow. She is only watching. And if we could sit beside her quietly and ask her what she is seeing, she might not quite be able to say. Because what she is seeing cannot easily be put into ordinary words. In the old Buddhist way, it is said that late in a long life, if we have been gentle with ourselves, a certain kind of seeing sometimes arrives. It is not a great spiritual achievement. It is not a reward for good behavior. It is simply what begins to happen when we have been sitting with the passing nature of things for long enough. Slowly, the world becomes transparent. The solid world of separate objects and separate selves begins to shimmer. And through the shimmering, something else begins to show. Something steady, something luminous, something that does not pass. The wise ones who have glimpsed this, across many centuries and many traditions, have tried to describe it in many different tongues. They have called it the source, the ground, the great silence, the one taste, the quiet light. No name ever quite fits. But the feeling, when it arrives, is unmistakable. It feels like coming home to something that has been waiting patiently behind everything, all along. Let us explore a story about a wise old woman who lived in a small stone cottage high on a green hillside, in a country of wind and sheep and slow-moving clouds. She had been a teacher in her younger years, and her students still sometimes climbed the long path to visit her, though her hair had gone very white, and her hands trembled a little when she poured the tea. She was in the last gentle years of her life, and she knew it, and she spoke of it with a softness that was beautiful to be near. Her cottage was very simple. A wooden table, 2 chairs, a window that looked out upon the green hills and the low stone walls and the small moving shapes of the sheep, a kettle that sang quietly upon a small iron stove, a vase of wildflowers changed every few days by the young shepherd who lived down the hill. The kind of small, warm place that feels less like a house and more like the center of a gentle world. One afternoon, a young student came to sit with her. She was someone who had studied with the old woman for many years and who had loved her deeply. They had tea together and they spoke of small things. The movement of the sheep upon the hill, the health of the flowers in the small stone garden, the color of the sky, which that day was the softest possible blue, the kind of blue that feels more like a memory than a color. The young student noticed, after a while, that the old woman was looking out the window with a strange, soft smile. She was holding her teacup in both hands, and her eyes had gone somewhere else. She was not lost in thought, exactly. She was more like someone listening to a very distant music that no one else could hear. The student asked her gently what she was looking at. The old woman turned her eyes back slowly. She said, "I am looking at the faces of those I have loved. Even when they are not here, I see them. And I see something that is hard to describe. When I look at a face I love, I see how it is right now. But I also see, just beneath the skin, that it is a kind of slow-moving river. The face I am looking at is not the face I saw yesterday, and it will not be the face I see tomorrow. It is a stream, a beautiful, flowing stream of light and shadow, always changing, never quite the same. The student asked, very softly, "Does that make you sad, old mother?" The old woman was quiet for a long moment. She set down her teacup. She said, "At first, it did. I used to want to cup my hands around the faces I loved and hold them still. I wanted to stop the moving. I wanted to keep each dear face exactly as it was in the moment I loved it most. There was a grief in me, for many years, about the fact that nothing would stay." She paused. She looked down at her own thin hands in her lap, and then she smiled with something that looked almost like wonder. But then, one day, I noticed something. I noticed that my own hands were also a stream. My own hands were flowing, moment to moment, shimmering like a small river. I could not cup my own hands around anything because my hands themselves were not solid. They were only another shape of the moving. There was nothing solid to cup around anything. There was only the flowing. And when I saw that, something very strange and beautiful happened to me. "What happened, old mother?" "I began to see a kind of light," the old woman said, her voice grown very soft. "A soft light that shone through all the moving, through my hands, through the faces of those I loved, through the grass outside this window, through the sheep on the hillside, through everything, as if every passing thing were made of this quiet, shining something. And the shining never passed. Only the shapes it took were passing." The young student did not speak. She did not know what to say. But she sat with the old woman for a long time, in the silence of that late afternoon. And somewhere inside her, something soft began to open. She too began to see, very faintly, what the old woman was seeing. Not with her eyes, with something quieter than her eyes. The teacup in her hand, the woven mat upon the floor, the light on the wooden table. For one soft breath, it all seemed to shimmer, to become almost transparent, as if lit from somewhere behind the world. When she finally stood to leave, the old woman took her hand. She said, "Do not worry too much about me, little one. I am not afraid. I have been practicing this letting go for a long time, and what I have learned is that the light does not leave. Only the shapes change. The light is what we are. It has always been what we are." The young student walked slowly down the long path that evening, through the green hills, as the sun was setting, and she found that the whole world, everywhere she looked, seemed to be quietly shining. This is a kind of seeing that cannot be forced. It is not a reward. It is not an achievement. It is only what sometimes becomes possible when we have been keeping company with the passing of things, patiently and kindly, for a long while. Slowly, without our quite noticing, the grip of our grasping begins to loosen. The wall between ourselves and the world grows thin, and we begin to feel something the Zen masters have tried for many centuries to describe. We are not small cups being slowly emptied by time. We are much more like the water itself. The cups are the passing shapes. The water is what we are, and the water is everywhere. It fills every cup. It fills every face. It fills every tree and every bird and every passing cloud. And it does not run out. When we glimpse this, even for a single breath, the strange fear that has followed us quietly for most of our lives begins to ease. The fear that we are small and alone in a world that will one day take us. That fear softens, not because we have conquered it, but because, for a breath, we have remembered what we really are. We are not only the passing shape, we are also the shining, and the shining was never in any danger. There is an old poet from a warm country far across the desert who spent his whole life writing of this quiet light. His words have been passed from hand to hand for many centuries, and still they are whispered to the weary, and still they bring great comfort. He wrote in one of his small poems, "The source is within you. This whole world is springing up from it. The source is full. Its waters are ever flowing. Do not grieve. Drink your fill. Do not think it will ever run dry. This is an endless ocean. The image is gentle and true. We are not small vessels being slowly emptied by time. We are the endless ocean itself, taking the shape of small vessels for a little while. The vessels will pass. The ocean will not. And the ocean, astonishingly, is what we are. This is what the old woman at her window was seeing. This is what the forest monk with his already broken glass was pointing toward. This is what the Buddha, long ago, sat with beneath his fig tree on that warm night many centuries past. Underneath all the passing, all the changing, all the coming and the going, there is a quiet and unchanging light. And it is not somewhere far away. It is not beyond the stars. It is here. It is now. It is closer to you than your own breath. Perhaps this is why, at the end of long and gentle lives, so many wise ones have said the same thing, with soft smiles upon their faces. They have said, "Do not grieve for me. I have not gone anywhere. I was never only this shape you knew. I was the shining that took this shape for a while. And the shining does not leave. The shining is what you are too. This does not mean we will not miss the shapes. We will. The shapes are dear. The faces, the voices, the hands we have held, these are all precious beyond saying. But underneath the missing, there is a quieter knowing. A knowing that what we truly love has never been only a shape. What we truly love is the shining itself. And the shining is everywhere. It is in the next face we meet. It is in the next morning light upon a kitchen table. It is in the slow rise and fall of the breath, right now, in this quiet hour. Perhaps you have known this in small ways already. Perhaps you have known it in a moment of looking into the eyes of someone you love and feeling a warmth that seemed to come from somewhere far beyond the two of you. Perhaps you have known it in a quiet evening, sitting alone, when the ordinary room suddenly seemed full of a soft presence you could not name. Perhaps you have known it in the eyes of a small child who looks out at the world for a moment and seems to be looking from somewhere very old and very wise. These are not tricks of the mind. These are small glimpses of the shining showing through. Everything passes, and yet, somehow, nothing is lost. This is the oldest and softest of the mysteries. The Buddhist sages said that if we sit with it long enough, with patience and kindness, it eventually shows itself. Not as an idea, as a quiet light that we have been all along. So if you are weary tonight, let this be a small comfort. You are not a cup being emptied. You are the water that fills the cup. You are not a candle burning down. You are the light the candle carries for a little while. You are not the passing shape you have sometimes mistaken yourself for. You are the shining that shines through every passing shape. And the shining is enough. It has always been enough. The Zen masters said this is the deepest peace we can find. Not a peace that comes from fixing anything. Not a peace that comes from getting our lives to stay still. A peace that comes from recognizing what we have been all along. A peace that was already here, waiting, underneath the waves of our small worries, quiet as a deep ocean below a busy surface. When we remember it, even for a breath, everything grows a little easier. The shoulders soften. The fear loosens. The small bright details of the present moment begin to shine a little more brightly. This is the gift of sitting with impermanence all the way through. We begin with sorrow, perhaps. But if we keep sitting, gently and patiently, the sorrow slowly gives way to wonder. And the wonder gives way to something even softer. A quiet recognition. A quiet homecoming. A quiet knowing that we are, and always have been, the light itself. Rest here in the quiet. Let the breath grow soft and slow. When you are ready, we will continue on. And so we come, gently, to the end of our time together tonight. Outside, wherever you are, the world goes on doing what it has always done. The stars turn slowly above the rooftops. The wind moves through whatever trees are near your window. Somewhere, a river is still running to the sea. Somewhere, a candle is still burning. Somewhere, a sleeping child is breathing softly in and out, and the whole of the great, tender world is still passing, quietly, through itself. It has been a quiet gift to sit together in this small hour. Whatever brought you here tonight, whatever you may have been carrying when you first settled in, perhaps the stories have made that weight a little lighter. Perhaps some small line, spoken in passing, has softened something that needed softening. And perhaps you will remember, in the days to come, something that the Zen masters long ago knew, and that every gentle grandmother has whispered to a weeping child. Everything passes. The sorrow passes. The trouble passes. The aching longing in the chest, whatever its shape tonight, it too will pass. And the joy passes, and the sweetness, and the ordinary miracle of the breath you are breathing right now. All of it is moving, always. All of it is given freely. All of it is quietly asking to be loved, just for the little while that it is here. There is nothing to carry with you into sleep. There is nothing to remember, no teaching to hold tight. Some small seed will find some quiet corner of your heart, and in its own time, in its own soft way, it will begin to grow. You do not need to tend it. You only need to rest. Let the body grow heavy. Let the breath grow slow. Let whatever small worries have followed you into this hour loosen their grip a little, and then a little more. They will still be there tomorrow, if they wish. Tonight, they do not need your company. Remember, as you drift towards sleep, that you are not a small cup being slowly emptied. You are the water that fills the cup. You are not a candle burning down. You are the light the candle carries for a little while. You are not the passing shape you have sometimes mistaken yourself for. You are the shining that shines through every passing shape. And the shining is enough. It has always been enough. Remember too that you are held. You have always been held by something warmer and larger than your own small worries, by the soft soil of this world, which has carried every tired traveler before you, and which will carry you now, gently, into the night. May the hours ahead be kind. May the breath grow soft and full. May the small troubles of the day loosen and drift away like leaves upon a quiet stream. May you remember, in whatever dreams find you tonight, that you are loved, and you are held, and you are part of something very old and very tender that has been holding all beings since the world began. May all beings, everywhere, rest tonight in their own quiet peace. May the great turning wheel of this world keep turning, softly, through the dark. And may every passing moment, from this one to the next, be received with a little more tenderness than the one before. May you wake, whenever you do, a little softer than you were yesterday, a little more at home in your own heart, a little more in love with this one beautiful, passing life. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.